From 1730 to the 1770s marked a new period in design, the Rococo period. Initially, gilded wood objects in the early Rococo style shared three principal characteristics: asymmetry, also to the point of deformity, heavy use of the S-curve, and heavy ornamentation based on natural design elements. On chairs, picture frames, and consoles, these led to a new emphasis on moldings. Where previously the ground had always been decorated, the new style relied on much simpler grounds set off from very bold, sweeping moldings by the strong contrast between the matte and the burnished gilding. The repertoire of this era, generally the Louis XV period, is also markedly different. A new emphasis was to accentuate the carvings by adding veins to the leaves, by undercutting to add definition to the forms. In a true reflection of the prevalent social mood, the tone of the gilding became much lighter and less somber than it had previously been before. The bowl was usually Venetian red. The color of the leaf common was much warmer, except on the moldings. Very little burnishing was done from now on. To accentuate the contrast, the swept coves were left matte, which gave them a tone that was very dry and pale. Undulating anthropomorphic motifs vaguely resembling the human ear became fashionable. This is known as the articular style. By 1755, designers introduced symmetrical arrangements of Rococo elements. The ornaments remained the same as they did before, but they were applied in a more balanced, classical manner under the leadership of designers now, not the craftsmen. Furniture was typically carved with heavy shoulders, rolled feet, central reserves, and garlands of flower. The art of the gilder was sensitive to shifts in fashion, and the gilders began selecting a lighter lemon gold leaf. The repertoire, or the repairer, continued the tradition of accentuating the carving rather than decorating it. The seeking of perfection in the execution of the craft became increasingly apparent at this time. The very free, spontaneous character began in the Baroque era and was gradually giving way to the delicacy and elegance of the neoclassical style by the end of the 18th century. At the same time, there was evidence that the carvers were assuming an ever-increasing role in designing the details of the ornaments, as evidenced by carvers working sketches at the margins of designers' and architects' plans. The word on the street was, all the artisans are becoming artists. The details have never been done better, more acute, more articulate. The improvements of the craftsman's skills was possibly due to the training offered at the two schools in the 11th arrondissement. The two schools of the artisan neighborhood of Paris, the École des Arts for design and the Académie de Saint-Loup for carving, which neither one of these exists today. In the mid-1750s, however, there was a pronounced departure from the Rococo movement. Under the influence of the wealthy, collectors, greatly influenced by the excavations of Pompeii, Italy, this helped introduce what is known as goût grec, Greek taste, also known as the antique style. Geometric design elements from classical antiquity. By the end of the 1760s, the severity of Greek taste gave way to a softer and more feminine expression of these classical motifs. The seeking of the true taste to find a leveling out was influenced by the visits to Italy of the Marquis de Mangy and he is Madame de Pompadour's brother, and by the French artists studying at the Academy of Rome. In the 1760s, chairmakers began applying these neoclassical ornaments to gilded wooden objects in an impersonal, sometimes even abstract manner. Turning away from lyricism, the ornaments began arranging design elements with a studied balance. In this emerging style, the technical characteristics of gilding were at last distinct. There were no longer any trace of any exuberance of early periods. Rather, in the late 18th century, repair strictly followed the carving. The leaf was usually a lemon gold, cool in tone, but very yellow rather than dark. It was usually applied on a deep maroon bowl. Occasionally, light red bowl was used. The application of the leaf exhibits a striving for technical precision that is apparent in these new designs. The overlay of the leaf are fine and regular as compared to the helter-skelter of the past. Breaks in the gilding are very rare now. There are also highly regular patterns of matte and burnished gilding that visually juxtapose the two to create a harmonic rhythm. The mattes and burnishes themselves were pushed to extremes. The mattes almost looked like sand, whereas the burnishes were polished to a high gloss, making their interplay dazzling. Yet, during the neoclassical period, there also was the greatest diversity in design, and a huge quantity of production was compared to the past. Studios were set up now with bench after bench after bench in a production manner. This may be a consequence of the commercial activities of both the upholsterers and the marchands merciers, who were retailers of all the decorative arts in France at that time, being now called the sellers of everything and the makers of nothing. How condescending from the artist's point of view. Commissioned chair frames from chair makers to sell in their boutiques. These boutiques were centered along the famous Faubourg Saint-Honoré. The marchands merciers worked directly with the designers or were designers themselves, thereby exerting much influence on the taste and design of the period. Hence, the gilded objects became greed-driven. The years preceding the French Revolution saw the culmination of the gilder's art in France. Never before had so much money been spent on furniture. It was during this period that collaborations between designers and chair makers and carvers and gilders resulted in a piece of some sublime refinement that graced the finest affluent apartments of Louis XIV and Marie Antoinette. These craftsmen produced gilded objects that embodied all the artistic prestige of political and economic power of the French monarchy on the eve of its destruction, the Revolution.